The massive space station hung in the dark void above Kepler Prime like a silver jewel against black velvet. Inside its gleaming halls, beings from across the galaxy gathered in the emergency council chamber. The air itself seemed to vibrate. With fear and desperation, Ambassador Zelt, 9 of the Crystalline Federation, stood at the center of the circular chamber. His body was made of living crystal that usually glowed with a soft blue light. Today, that light flickered like a dying candle. Around him sat representatives from 47 different worlds, and each one looked as scared as he felt. The holographic display above them showed the latest horror. The planet Delton 4 had been home to 6 million peaceful farmers, just 3 days ago. Now it was a burning wasteland of ash and twisted metal. The Vorthok Collective had come, and nothing lived there anymore. "This makes 17 systems," Zelt 9 said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber through the translation devices. 17 complete star systems consumed by the Collective in just 8 months. They are not slowing down, are getting faster. A ripple of terrified whispers ran through the assembled delegates. The Peaceful Consortium's representative, a tall being with 6 arms and skin like tree bark, raised one hand. "Surely our combined fleets can stop them. We have the numbers." Zelt 9 turned toward the speaker. His crystal face showed no expression. But his light dimmed further. "We tried that at Rigel 7. We sent 400 ships from 12 different worlds. The Vorthok destroyed them all in less than 6 hours. Their technology adapts to everything we throw at them." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems. On the display, images cycled through the devastation. Cities that had stood for thousands of years reduced to rubble, orbital stations twisted into unrecognizable shapes, entire populations simply gone, turned into raw materials for the Collective's war machines. The Vorthok were not like other enemies. The galaxy had known. They were part machine, part biological horror. They consumed everything in their path and used it to build more of themselves. Worse, they seemed to enjoy causing pain. The few survivors who escaped their attacks all told the same story. Vorthok did not simply kill. They tortured, they experimented, they played with their victims like children pulling wings off insects. "What about the weapon systems from the ancient archives?" asked the delegate from New Centauri. Surely there is something there we have not tried." Admiral Kex Prime of the Defense Coalition stepped forward. His people were among the few warrior races left in the civilized galaxy, but even he looked defeated. "We have tried everything in the archives. Energy weapons, kinetic bombardment, quantum disruptors, even the forbidden planet killer missiles. The Collective adapts to all of it within hours. Their ships learn from every attack," he continued. "What destroys one Vorthok vessel makes the next one stronger. It is as if they want us to attack them, just so they can become more dangerous." The representative from the healing worlds, a being that looked like a walking flower with too many eyes, spoke in a voice like wind through grass. "Perhaps we could try negotiation. Every species responds to reason eventually." The chamber erupted. In bitter laughter and angry voices, Zelt 9 raised his hands for silence. When the noise died down, he activated another display. This one showed recordings from the Vorthok attacks, but with the sound enabled. The screams that filled the chamber were not from any single species. They were a chorus of agony from dozens of different worlds. But worse than the screams were the other sounds. Laughter. The Vorthok were laughing as they worked. "They do not want to negotiate," Zelt 9 said quietly. "They want to play. We are. They're toys, and they are having fun breaking us." The flower being's petals wilted visibly. Several other delegates looked away from the display, but the sounds continued. Laughter continued. Admiral Kex Prime moved to the center of the chamber. His armor, which bore the scars of 100 battles, seemed suddenly inadequate. "Have fought in wars across half the galaxy," he said. "I have seen cruelty and madness in every form of violence our species have created. But this is different. The Vorthok are not just trying to win. They are trying to hurt us. They want us to suffer." "They are artists," said another voice, "and pain is their art." The words came from Dr. Yelka, the xenobiologist who had studied The few Vorthok specimens they had managed to capture. She was a small gray being with large black eyes that had seen too much. I have examined their biology, their technology, their behavior patterns. They have evolved beyond the need for conquest. They have all the resources they could possibly use. They do this because they enjoy it. The chamber fell into a deeper silence. This was the truth they had all suspected, but none had wanted to voice. They were not fighting an enemy that wanted something they could give or trade or negotiate for. They were fighting an enemy that fed on their suffering. "What do we do?" asked a voice from the back of the chamber. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of billions of lives across dozens of worlds. Zelt-9 looked around the chamber at the faces of the galaxy's leaders. Some were human-like, others completely alien, but all showed the same expression. Fear, helplessness, desperation. "We need help," he said finally. "Help from someone who understands violence the way we understand peace. Someone who can think like the Vorthok think." "Where would we find such beings?" asked Admiral Kexprim. "Every civilized species in the galaxy is represented here." Dr. Yelka activated her personal datapad and projected a star chart above the chamber. Most of the stars were familiar, marking the homes of the various council species. But there was one section marked in red labeled as Unexplored Space. 6 months ago, our deep space scouts made contact with a new system, she said. Third planet from a yellow star they call Sol. The species calls itself human, and they have not yet achieved interstellar travel. Primitives, scoffed someone from the back rows. No, Dr. Yelka said, and her voice carried a note that made everyone pay attention. Dangerous. Their entire planet is covered with the ruins of wars. They have fought each other continuously. For their entire recorded history, they have weapons capable of destroying their own world, and they have come close to using them multiple times. She changed the display to show images from Earth, cities reduced to rubble, battlefields stretching to the horizon. Weapons that could kill millions at once. But also something else. Humans helping other humans. Humans rebuilding after disasters. Humans facing impossible odds and fighting anyway. They're violent beyond anything we have seen in civilized space, Dr. Yelka continued. But they are also capable of incredible sacrifice for others. They will die to protect strangers. They will fight hopeless battles just because they believe it is right. Admiral Kexprime studied the images with the eye of a professional soldier. These humans have fought wars using everything from sharp sticks to weapons that split atoms. They have never known galactic peace. Violence is not something they have forgotten how to do. "Are you suggesting we ask a primitive species to help us?" asked the peaceful consortium delegate. "I am suggesting we ask a species that knows how to hurt people," Zelt-9 replied. "Because right now, we need someone who understands monsters well enough to fight them." The debate that followed lasted for hours, but in the end, the decision was simple. They had tried everything civilized. Now, they needed to try something else. The message was crafted carefully, explained the threat, offered what help they could provide, and made their request clear. They needed warriors. They needed people who could match the Vorthek's cruelty with something equally dangerous. They asked for heroes. The transmission was sent toward the Sol system at the speed of light, carrying with it the hopes of 47 different worlds and billions of lives. None of the council members knew what kind of response they would receive. They were about to find out that sometimes, when you ask for heroes, the universe sends you something much more dangerous instead. The message from space arrived on a Tuesday morning at the Deep Space monitoring station in Colorado. Dr. Susan Clark was drinking her third cup of coffee when the computers started screaming alerts. She had worked at the station for 12 years, mostly listening to background radiation and the occasional signal from old satellites. She had never heard the computers make sounds like this. The signal was coming from outside the solar system. It was clearly artificial, clearly intelligent, and completely impossible according to everything humanity knew about the universe. Dr. Clark stared at the data streaming across her screens and reached for the red phone that connected directly to the Pentagon. Colonel Jake Morrison was in a budget meeting when his secure phone rang. He had been arguing about ammunition costs for the past hour and was grateful for any interruption. That gratitude disappeared when he heard what Dr. Clark had to tell him. 20 minutes later, Morrison was in a helicopter heading for Colorado. 2 hours after that, he was standing in the monitoring station, watching the alien message play on the main screen. The translation software had taken some time to work, but the meaning was clear enough. Aliens existed. They were fighting a war. They were losing. They wanted Earth's help. This has to be some kind of joke, said General Patricia Hayes, who had arrived an hour after Morrison. She was a small woman with gray hair and eyes like steel, and she had spent 30 years in the military without ever seeing anything that prepared her for this. The signal is coming from a .47 light-years away, Dr. Clark replied. The energy requirements to send something this powerful across that distance would require resources that don't exist on Earth. This is either real or someone has technology so advanced that the distinction doesn't matter. Morrison studied the message again. The aliens had included tactical data about their enemy, something called the Vorthok Collective. The images were horrifying. Entire planets stripped bare. Cities turned to ash. Populations simply gone. But what caught his attention were the casualty reports. They've lost 400 ships in a single battle, he said. That's more firepower than exists on our entire planet, and these Vorthok things destroyed it all in 6 hours. General Hayes nodded grimly. So why are they asking? Us for help? We barely have chemical rockets. Our most advanced weapons are nuclear missiles that take an hour to reach the other side of the planet. Dr. Clark pulled up another section of the message. They're not asking for our technology. They're asking for our people, specifically. They want warriors, people who understand violence. The room fell quiet, except for the hum of computers. Morrison and Hayes looked at each other with the kind of understanding that comes from years of military service. They both knew what the aliens were really asking for. They want killers, Morrison said finally. Professional ones, Hayes agreed. The emergency meeting at the Pentagon began 4 hours later. The room was filled with generals, admirals, intelligence officers, and politicians. President Carter had been briefed by secure video link and given his authorization for whatever response seemed appropriate. The debate was heated and confused, but eventually someone asked the right question. What kind of people are they looking for, exactly? Asked Admiral Robert King of Naval Intelligence. Morrison activated the wall display and showed the tactical analysis. Based on their casualty reports and the descriptions of their enemy, they need people who can think outside the rules of civilized warfare. They've been fighting this war the way we fought wars 100 years ago, with honor and rules, and concern for civilian casualties. And that's not working? Asked someone from the back of the room. Their enemy doesn't follow any rules, Hayes replied. They torture for fun, they target civilians deliberately, and they turn captured populations into raw materials. The aliens are trying to fight honorably against an enemy that has no honor. The room erupted in discussion, but Morrison was already thinking about personnel files. After 30 years in the military, he knew where to find the kind of people the aliens were describing. The problem was that most of those people were either dead, in prison, or had been kicked out of the service. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was in her apartment in San Diego when the call came. She had been honorably discharged 3 months earlier after her third tour in hostile territory, and she was still trying to figure out what to do with the rest of her life. The nightmares were getting better. She still woke up most nights reaching for weapons that weren't there. The voice on the phone was Colonel Morrison, though she'd never heard of him. He asked if she would be interested in a special assignment that involved travel and extremely hazardous duty. When she asked for details, he told her to report to Edwards Air Force Base the next morning and bring everything she owned. Captain Danny Brooks got his call at the military prison in Fort Leavenworth. He'd been serving a 5-year sentence for disobeying direct orders during a rescue mission in Africa. The official report said he had endangered his unit and violated the rules of engagement. The unofficial truth was that he had saved 47 civilians by killing 12 enemy soldiers who were using children as human shields. When the warden told him he had a visitor from Washington, Brooks assumed it was another appeals lawyer. Instead, It was Colonel Morrison with an offer that seemed too good to be true: immediate release, full reinstatement, an assignment to a classified mission that would let him do what he did best. "What's the catch?" Brooks asked. "You might not. Come back," Morrison replied. Brooks signed the papers without reading them. Sergeant Amy Carter was facing a court-martial when her orders came through. She had been charged with the unauthorized execution of 3 prisoners who had been identified as war criminals. The evidence against the prisoners was solid, but military law required that they be turned over to civilian authorities for proper trial. Carter had decided that proper trials took too long. She was cleaning her weapon in the holding facility when Colonel Morrison walked in. He sat down across from her and opened a file folder. "The aliens sent us a list of the kind of people they need," he said without introduction. "People who can make hard decisions quickly. People who understand that sometimes the mission matters more than the rules. People who can sleep at night after doing things that need to be done." Carter looked up from her rifle. "And you think that's me? I think you killed 3 monsters who deserve to die, and now you're being punished for it by people who have never seen what those monsters did to children." She put down the cleaning rod and looked at him carefully. "What are you offering?" "Chance to kill monsters that are worse than anything you've ever seen. No rules, no oversight, no court-martials for doing what needs to be done." Lieutenant Commander Rick Stone was already out of the service when they found him. He had been discharged 2 years earlier after an incident during an interrogation that had gone too far by official standards. The terrorist had been planning to bomb a school, and Stone had gotten the information needed to stop it. The methods he used were technically torture under military law. He was working as a security consultant in Los Angeles when Morrison's people tracked him down. They found him in a bar, drinking alone and trying to forget what he had seen and done in the name of protecting innocent people. "We need someone who knows how to get information from people who don't want to give it," Morrison told him over the noise of the crowd. "I'm not that person anymore," Stone replied. "The aliens are fighting an enemy that tortures entire populations for entertainment. Their interrogation techniques involve keeping victims alive for months while they experiment on them. We need someone who understands that kind of mind." Stone finished his drink and looked at Morrison with eyes that had seen too much. "When do we leave?" Recruitment continued for 3 days. They found volunteers in military prisons, in discharge proceedings, and among soldiers who had been quietly forced out of the service for being too violent, too ruthless, or too willing to bend the rules. They found mercenaries and former special forces operators who had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrowed. Each person they recruited had a different story, but they all had the same thing in common. They had been judged too dangerous for civilized warfare by their own military. They were the soldiers that other soldiers whispered about, the ones who got results but asked too high a price. By Friday, they had assembled 43 volunteers. Not one of them would have been anyone's first choice for representing humanity to an alien civilization. They were criminals and outcasts, killers and madmen, people who had been discarded by a society that needed them to exist but didn't want to acknowledge what they did. The final briefing took place in a secure bunker beneath Edwards Air Force Base. Morrison stood before the assembled volunteers and explained what they would be facing. He showed them images of the Vorthok atrocities, tactical data about the enemy's capabilities, and translation files of the alien message. "They asked for heroes," he said finally. "They want noble warriors who can save their civilization while maintaining the moral high ground. They want people who can win this war without becoming monsters themselves." He looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. The alien ship that came to collect the humans was unlike anything they had ever imagined. It hung in Earth's orbit like a silver mountain, 3 miles long and perfectly smooth. There were no visible engines, no weapons, no markings of any kind. It simply floated in space, as if the laws of physics were suggestions it chose to ignore. The transport shuttle that carried the 43 human volunteers was tiny compared to the alien vessel. As they approached the docking bay, Captain Rodriguez pressed her face against the small window and whistled softly. She had flown combat missions over some of the most dangerous places on Earth, but this was something else entirely. "Which makes you feel small, doesn't it?" said Captain Brooks from the SU. "Seat beside her." Makes me feel like an ant crawling into a cathedral, she replied. The docking bay was large enough to hold a dozen Earthships the size of their shuttle.
Oh.
The walls were covered in patterns that seemed to shift and move when you looked at them. Directly, soft lights provided illumination, though no one could see where they came from. The air tasted clean and somehow artificial, like it had been built rather than grown. Colonel Morrison was the first to step out of the shuttle. He had been in the military for 30 years and had learned to hide his emotions behind a professional mask. That mask almost slipped when he saw what was waiting for them. The reception committee consisted of 12 beings from different species, each one stranger than the last. There was Ambassador Zelt 9, whose crystal body caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. Next to him stood Dr. Yelka, a small gray creature with huge black eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Admiral Kex Prime wore armor that looked like it had grown rather than been manufactured, and scars covered every visible surface. But it was the way they moved that caught Morrison's attention. These beings moved like prey animals, always alert, always ready to run. Even the warrior admiral kept his distance and watched the humans with obvious nervousness. "Welcome to the Midnight Runner," Ambassador Zelt 9 said through a translation device that made his voice sound hollow and strange. "We are grateful that your species has chosen to help us in our time of need." Morrison stepped forward and offered what he hoped was a reassuring smile. Several of the aliens took a step backward. "We're honored to be here, Ambassador. My people are ready to do whatever is necessary." The formal greeting ceremony had been planned to last an hour. It took less than 15 minutes before the aliens began to realize they had made a mistake. The humans did not act like the heroes they had expected. They moved through the ship like soldiers entering enemy territory, their eyes constantly scanning for threats and escape routes. They asked questions that made the aliens uncomfortable. They wanted to know about weapon systems, defensive capabilities, and the locations of critical systems. Sergeant Carter examined the smooth walls of the corridor, and ran her fingers along what looked like decorative panels. "These aren't decorations," she said to Lieutenant Commander Stone. "They're access points, probably for maintenance systems, or self-destruct mechanisms," Stone replied quietly. "Notice how they're positioned? If you wanted to cripple this ship quickly, you'd target those points." Dr. Yelka, who was walking nearby, heard the conversation and felt a chill run through her small body. The humans had been on the ship for less than an hour, and they were already discussing how to destroy it. The cultural briefing took place in what the aliens called the Harmony Chamber. It was a large round room with comfortable seating and walls that displayed peaceful scenes from various worlds. The aliens had prepared a presentation about their civilization, their values, and their way of life. Captain Rodriguez sat through the first part of the presentation with growing impatience. The aliens talked about peace, cooperation, and the importance of maintaining dignity even in warfare. They showed images of their beautiful worlds, their advanced cities, and their happy populations. "This is all very nice," Rodriguez said when the presentation paused. "But where are your weapons? How do you fight? What are your tactics?" "Ambassador?" Zeltnin's crystal form flickered with confusion. "We do not focus on such things. War is a regrettable necessity, but we try to conduct it with honor and minimal suffering." "Honor doesn't win wars," said Captain Brooks. "Results win wars." The aliens tried to explain their philosophy of warfare, had rules about protecting civilians, treating prisoners with respect, and avoiding unnecessary destruction. They fought to defeat their enemies, not to destroy them completely. The humans listened with expressions that grew more puzzled as the briefing continued. Finally, Sergeant Carter raised her hand. "Let me make sure I understand this," she said. "You have an enemy that tortures people for fun, turns entire populations into raw materials, and has destroyed 17 of your star systems, and you're still worried about fighting fair?" "We cannot abandon our principles," replied Dr. Yelka. "We become like our enemies. Then what are we fighting to protect?" Stone leaned back in his chair and studied the assembled aliens. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the chamber. "You're fighting to survive. Everything else is luxury." The real shock came when the aliens showed footage of Vorthok attacks. They had prepared the humans for what they thought would be a normal reaction of horror and revulsion. Instead, the humans watched with the cold attention of professionals studying a training film. "Pause it there," said Rodriguez, when the display showed a Vorthok torture facility. The image froze on a scene that had made several alien diplomats leave the room during previous viewings. Rodriguez stood up and walked closer to the display. "They're not trying to get information. Look at the pattern of injuries, the way they're positioned. This is about fear, not intelligence gathering." "Amateurs," agreed Carter. "They're trying to break minds, but they don't understand human psychology. They're using pain when they should be using hope." The aliens stared at the humans in growing horror. These beings were analyzing the torture methods. Like critics reviewing a work of art, they were discussing improvements to techniques that no civilized mind should even be able to contemplate. "How can you talk about such things so casually?" asked Dr. Yelka, her voice barely above a whisper. Brooks looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Because we've seen worse. And because we've done worse when we had to." The military briefing was even more disturbing for the aliens. They had prepared detailed tactical analyses of Vorthok strategies, hoping the humans would help them develop countermeasures. Instead, the humans identified weaknesses in ways that made Admiral Kexprim's skin crawl. "They follow predictable patterns," Stone observed, studying the enemy fleet movements. "Hierarchical command structure, logical progression, systematic approach to conquest. Their weakness isn't their tactics, it's that they think everyone else fights logically too." "What do you mean?" asked the Admiral. "They expect you to protect your civilians, so they target civilian areas knowing you'll rush to defend them. Expect you to follow rules of engagement, so they break those rules to gain advantage. They expect you to value honor more than victory." Morrison nodded slowly. "They're fighting the enemy they understand. They don't know how to fight the enemy they're facing, which is," asked Ambassador Zelt 9. "Madmen," replied Rodriguez. "People who don't follow any rules, who don't care about honor, and who are willing to do anything to win." The humans spent the next hour explaining concepts that the aliens had never encountered. Psychological warfare designed to break enemy morale rather than just defeat enemy forces. False surrender tactics that violated every treaty the aliens had ever signed. Targeting non-military personnel who supported the war effort. "You want to attack their supply lines?" said Brooks, pointing to the tactical display. "But you're only hitting military targets. What about the factories that make their equipment? Mines that provide raw materials? The transport systems that move supplies? Those are civilian targets," Admiral Kexprime protested. "We do not attack civilians. Everything is a military target if it helps them fight," Carter replied. "You can't win a war by being nice to people who are trying to kill you." The most disturbing moment came when Stone suggested ways to turn the Vorthok's own cruelty against them. "They like to torture prisoners, right? So give them prisoners. But make sure those prisoners are carrying something that will hurt them." When they tried to extract information, the silence that followed was deafening. Several aliens left the chamber, unable to listen anymore. Those who remained stared at the humans with expressions of shock and fear. Dr. Yelka finally found her voice. "You were talking about using our own people as weapons, about sacrificing innocents to hurt our enemies." "We're talking about winning," Morrison said quietly. "You asked for people who could match the Vorthok's brutality. We're trying to show you what that looks like." "But you're supposed to be heroes," whispered Ambassador Zelti-9. The humans looked at each other, and for the first time since boarding the ship, several of them smiled. But they were not pleasant smiles. They were the smiles of predators who had just realized that their prey had no idea what they were dealing with. "No," said Rodriguez finally. "We're not heroes. We're the people. Heroes call when being heroic isn't enough for SP." The first joint operation took place. 3 weeks after the humans arrived at the staging area on Kepler Prime, the target was a Vorthok forward base on a mining world in the Tao Ceti system. Intelligence reports showed that the enemy had fortified the planet's surface and was using captured miners as slave labor in underground facilities. The alien coalition had planned a standard military assault. Admiral Kexprime showed the humans a detailed battle plan that involved precise orbital bombardment of military targets, followed by ground troops moving in to secure key locations and rescue the prisoners. It was clean, efficient, and designed to minimize casualties on both sides. The humans listened politely to the presentation. Then Captain Brooks asked a question that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. What about the civilians the Vorthok are holding? We will rescue them once we secure the military objectives, Admiral Kex Prime replied. How many civilians? Asked Captain Rodriguez. Dr. Yelka consulted her datapad. Approximately 40,000 miners and their families. They are being held in underground facilities beneath the main Vorthok installation. And how long will your assault take? This question came from Sergeant Carter. We estimate 6 to 8 hours to secure all objectives and begin rescue operations. The humans exchanged glances. Lieutenant Commander Stone leaned forward in his chair. In 6 hours, those civilians will be dead. The Vorthok know you're coming. The first thing they'll do is kill the prisoners to deny you the propaganda victory. Ambassador Zeltnin's crystal form flickered with distress. Surely they would. Not murder innocent people just to spite us. They've murdered 6 million innocent people on 17 different worlds, replied Brooks. What makes you think 40,000 more will bother them? The argument that followed lasted for 3 hours. The aliens insisted on following proper military procedure. The humans insisted that proper military procedure would get everyone killed. Finally, Colonel Morrison stood up and made an announcement that changed everything. We'll handle the civilian rescue ourselves. Can attack the military targets however you want. Admiral Kex Prime's scarred face showed confusion. You cannot mount a successful assault with only 43 soldiers against a fortified position defended by thousands of Vorthok troops. Morrison smiled, and the expression made several aliens step backward. We're not going to assault anything. We're going to do something they won't expect. The humans refused to explain their plan in detail. They asked for transportation to the planet's surface, basic equipment, and 12 hours before the main assault began. The aliens were reluctant to agree, but they had run out of alternatives. Captain Brooks led the human team down to the planet in a stolen Vorthok transport ship that Sergeant Tony Martinez had rigged with explosives. Martinez was a demolitions expert who had been court-martialed for destroying an entire city block to eliminate 3 enemy soldiers. His psychological profile described him as creatively destructive and insufficiently concerned with collateral damage. The plan was simple and completely insane. Instead of attacking the Vorthok installations, the humans infiltrated the civilian detention camps. But they did not come to rescue the prisoners. They came to turn them into weapons. Corporal Helen White was the key to the operation. She'd been discharged from the military for using psychological torture techniques that violated every treaty Earth had ever signed. Her specialty was breaking people's minds and rebuilding them according to her specifications. She could turn a peaceful farmer into a killing machine in less than an hour. Fear is contagious, she explained to the terrified prisoners in the first camp they reached. The Vorthok understand physical pain, but they don't understand panic. They don't understand what happens when rational people stop being rational. The process was horrible to watch. White used a combination of drugs, hypnosis, and psychological manipulation to strip away the prisoners' civilized conditioning. She showed them recordings of what the Vorthok had done to other worlds, other families, other children. She made them understand that death was not the worst thing that could happen to them. Then she gave them weapons and told them how to use them. The riot began at exactly midnight. 40,000 prisoners, driven to madness by fear and rage, turned on their captors simultaneously. They had no training, no organization, and no plan beyond killing everything that moved. But they had numbers, and they had nothing left to lose. The Vorthok guards were not prepared for this kind of chaos. They had weapons and armor and superior technology, but they could not adapt to an enemy that fought without any logic or strategy. The prisoners threw themselves at the guards with bare hands, improvised weapons, in absolute desperation. While the underground facilities erupted in violence, Martinez was busy with his own part of the plan. It placed explosives throughout the Vorthok supply network, but not in the way any military engineer would have done it. He did not just destroy supply depots. He made them burn in patterns that could be seen from orbit. He turned ammunition storage facilities into fireworks displays that painted the night sky with fire. The psychological effect was devastating. The Vorthok had conquered 17 star systems using fear as their primary weapon. Now they were experiencing fear themselves for the first time in their existence. Captain Rodriguez led the space combat portion of the operation from a captured Vorthok fighter. She had spent the past 3 weeks teaching alien pilots that honor in battle was a luxury they could not afford. "Stop fighting fair," she told the shocked Crystalline Federation pilots. "Start fighting dirty." The alien pilots had been trained to engage in honorable single combat, matching skill against skill in clean duels between warriors. Rodriguez taught them to attack from ambush, to gang up on individual enemies, and to target wounded ships that were trying to retreat. "But that is dishonorable," protested Wing Commander Tral 9 of the Federation fleet. "Dishonor doesn't kill you," Rodriguez replied, as she destroyed a Vorthok ship by ramming it with a captured enemy vessel. "Dead is dead, and everything else is just opinion." The battle above the planet turned into a massacre, but not the kind the aliens had expected. For the first time in the war, it was the Vorthok who were being slaughtered. Their ships, designed for logical, tactical engagements, could not cope with enemies who used captured vessels as guided missiles and who attacked their own damaged allies to prevent them from being boarded and tortured down on the planet's surface. Captain Brooks and Lieutenant Commander Stone were implementing the most disturbing part of the human plan. They had captured several Vorthok commanders alive, and Stone was using his expertise in interrogation to extract information. But the information was not what mattered. What mattered was making sure other Vorthok forces could hear the screams. Stone had learned his techniques in places that officially did not exist, working on terrorists who had information about planned attacks on civilians. The military had discharged him for going too far, but they had never denied that his methods worked. "The Vorthok think pain is an art form," he explained to the horrified alien observers who watched through remote cameras. "Let's show them what real artists can do." The sounds that came from the interrogation facility were broadcast on all Vorthok communication frequencies. For the first time in their species' history, the Vorthok heard their own kind begging for death. The psychological impact rippled through their entire force structure. Sergeant Carter was handling the final phase of the operation. She had identified the Vorthok command structure and was systematically eliminating the officers in ways designed to maximize terror among the survivors. Her targets were not chosen for their military importance, but for the fear their deaths would create. "Kill the cruel ones slowly," she explained to Dr. Yelka, who was monitoring the operation from orbit. "You make examples of them. Smart ones will understand the message and maybe surrender. The stupid ones will make mistakes because they're afraid." The results spoke for themselves. In 6 hours, the Vorthok force on Tao Ceti had collapsed. Not because they had been defeated in battle, but because they had been terrified into submission. Many of them had simply fled, abandoning their positions and equipment in their panic to escape. The rescue of the civilian prisoners was successful, though the cost was higher than the aliens had expected. Nearly half of the 40,000 prisoners had died in the riots, killed by their captors, or by each other in the chaos. The survivors were traumatized beyond anything the alien medical teams had experienced treating, but they were alive. And the Vorthok were not. The victory celebration on the Coalition flagship was subdued. The aliens had won their first major battle against the Vorthok, but the methods used made them question whether victory was worth the price. Ambassador Zeltnine found Colonel Morrison in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. "Your people saved those civilians," the ambassador said. "Some of them," Morrison replied. "The cost was very high. It always is. The question is whether you're willing to pay it." Zeltnine's crystal form pulsed with conflicted emotions. "Is this how all your battles will be fought? With such brutality?" Morrison turned to face the alien diplomat. His expression was tired, but his eyes were hard. "We fight the way we need to fight to win." 6 months after the victory at Tao Ceti, the war had changed completely. The Vorthok collective, which had seemed unstoppable for so long, was retreating on all fronts. Their ships fled from battles they should have won easily. Their ground Forces abandoned fortified positions without being attacked.
Ow.
The galaxy's most feared enemy had learned what it was.
8.
The final battle was planned to take place in the Vorthok home system. The alien coalition had assembled the largest fleet in galactic history, with ships from 47 different worlds united under a single command. But everyone knew that the real assault would come from the human strike team. Colonel Morrison stood on the bridge of the flagship and watched the Vorthok homeworld grow larger on the main screen. It was a dark planet covered in massive industrial complexes and surrounded by defensive platforms that bristled with weapons. According to intelligence reports, over 2 billion Vorthok lived on that world. The main fleet will engage their orbital defenses, Admiral Kex Prime explained to the assembled human team. That should draw their attention away from your infiltration mission. Captain Brooks studied the tactical display with the cold attention he had brought to every battle. How many ships are we talking about? Our scouts report approximately 3,000 Vorthok vessels in the system. Their technology is still superior to ours, but their tactics have become defensive and predictable. Captain Rodriguez laughed, but the sound held no humor. Predictable is good. Predictable means they're thinking like victims instead of predators. The human team had grown over the past 6 months. What started as 43 volunteers had expanded to include specialists recruited from the alien coalition itself. Not every species was as peaceful as they claimed to be. Some had their own monsters, hidden away and forgotten until the humans showed them that monsters could be useful. Sergeant Carter had trained a team of alien soldiers in what she called practical warfare. These beings had been outcasts from their own societies, individuals who thought too much like humans for their people's comfort. They had learned to fight without honor, to kill without remorse, and to terrorize their enemies into submission. Lieutenant Commander Stone had established what he called information extraction centers on 12 different worlds. The aliens preferred not to know the details of what happened in those centers, but the intelligence they provided had been invaluable. The Vorthok command structure was in chaos, because their leaders could no longer trust their own communication networks. The infiltration of the Vorthok homeworld began 3 days before the main assault. The human team, now numbering over 200 beings from various species, used captured Vorthok ships to slip past the outer defenses. They had learned to think like their enemy, to move like their enemy, and to hide among their enemy. But they were not there to hide for long. The target was not any military installation or government facility. The humans had learned that the Vorthok collective was controlled by a central intelligence network buried deep beneath the planet's surface. This network coordinated the actions of every Vorthok in the galaxy through biological implants that connected individual minds to the collective consciousness. Captain Brooks led the assault team through the underground tunnels beneath the capital city. The passages were filled with defensive systems that should have been impossible to bypass, but Sergeant Martinez had spent months studying Vorthok technology. He had learned to think like their machines, to understand their logical processes, and to exploit the weaknesses that logic created. They built everything to be efficient, he explained, as he disabled another security system. But efficiency is predictable, and predictable things can be broken. The real breakthrough came when they reached the Central Intelligence Chamber. The massive room was filled with biological computing systems that pulsed with alien life. Cables and organic conduits connected every surface, carrying information between the collective minds of the entire Vorthok species. Dr. Yelka, who had joined the mission despite her horror at human methods, stared at the sight in amazement. This is how they coordinate their entire civilization. Every Vorthok in the galaxy is connected to this network. Then we don't destroy it, said Lieutenant Commander Stone, with a smile that made the alien scientists step backward. We corrupt it. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Instead of destroying the Vorthok communication network, the humans would take control of it. They would use the collective's own unity against them. Corporal White had spent months developing what she called viral thoughts. These were psychological patterns designed to spread through connected minds, like a disease. Fear, doubt, paranoia, and despair could be transmitted through the biological network, just like any other information. Their greatest strength is that they all think together, she explained as she prepared the psychological payload. But that means when one of them breaks, they all break. The injection of human-designed psychological warfare into the Vorthok collective consciousness began. At exactly noon, Galactic Standard Time. The effect was immediate and devastating. On the surface, Vorthok warriors suddenly stopped fighting and began screaming. In space, Vorthok ships turned their weapons on each other as panic spread through their crews. Across the galaxy, the entire collective began to tear itself apart as 2 billion linked minds experienced human-designed terror simultaneously. The battle above the planet became a slaughter, but not the way anyone had expected. The massive Vorthok fleet, which should have easily destroyed the coalition forces, began destroying itself. Ships rammed into defensive platforms. Weapon systems turned on their own vessels. The perfect unity that had made the collective so dangerous became the source of its destruction. Admiral Kex Prime watched the carnage from his command ship and felt something he had never experienced before. The sight of his enemies destroying themselves should have brought satisfaction, but instead he felt only horror at what the humans had unleashed. "Is this what victory looks like?" he asked Colonel Morrison, who stood beside him on the bridge. "This is what human victory looks like," Morrison replied. "We don't just defeat our enemies, we make them defeat themselves." The surrender came 3 hours later. The Vorthok Collective, reduced to scattered groups of terrified individuals cut off from their network, sent a message that no one in the galaxy had ever expected to hear. They begged for mercy. The transmission was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching every world in known space. The voice that spoke was broken, desperate, and completely unlike the arrogant threats the galaxy had grown accustomed to. "We surrender. We submit. We will do whatever you ask. Please make it stop. Please make the thoughts stop." The psychological virus had not just broken the collective's military power. It had shattered their entire conception of reality. For a species that had never known individual fear, the experience of human-designed terror was more devastating than any physical weapon could have been. Colonel Morrison stood in the ruins of the Vorthok Intelligence Center and activated his communication device. The message he sent was brief and went out to every coalition ship in the system. Mission accomplished. The collective has surrendered unconditionally. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days and reached every corner of the galaxy. 47 different worlds held festivals to commemorate the end of the war. Statues were erected, songs were written, the human volunteers were hailed as the greatest heroes in galactic history. But the celebration was not universal. Ambassador Zelt 9 found Colonel Morrison in the detention facility where the surviving Vorthok leaders were being held. The humans had established the facility according to their own standards, and the conditions were deliberately harsh. The prisoners were kept in individual cells, cut off from each other and from any hope of reestablishing their collective network. "The war is over," the ambassador said. "Surely there is no need for such treatment of prisoners." Morrison looked through the transparent wall at the Vorthok commander inside. The being that had once been part of a collective consciousness capable of destroying star systems was now curled in a corner, whimpering softly and flinching at every sound. "They're not prisoners," Morrison replied. "They're examples. As long as they're alive and suffering, every species in the galaxy will remember. What happens to civilizations that threaten others? This is not justice. This is cruelty. This is prevention. Do you want to fight another war like this in 50 years, when some other species decides to try conquest?" The ambassador's crystal form flickered with conflicted emotions. The logical part of his mind understood Morrison's reasoning, but everything else about his nature rebelled against it. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Will your people stay? Will you help us rebuild?" Morrison turned away from the cell and looked at the alien diplomat with eyes that had seen too much. "It depends. Do you still need monsters?" It's a question hung in the air between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The galaxy was safe, but the price of that safety was higher than anyone had imagined. The civilized worlds had their peace, but they had paid for it by unleashing something that might be worse than their former enemies.